Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming to this presentation. I'm Tracy Claremont. I run the statewide angler survey program, also known as the Creel program. And I've been working for the DNR and Fisheries Division since 2008. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Creel program, and then I'm going to share the steelhead data that I was able to compile for you for this talk. So what is the Creel program? To me, it's all of these amazing faces of the Creel clerks. Creel clerks are assigned a region of the state, and within that region, they rove different boat launches and they collect interviews from people who have finished their fishing trips. They ask a lot of questions and they sample a lot of your fish. And it's the answers to those questions that are going to provide the basis for the data that I share with you. I did want to plug here that we are actually currently hiring more than half a dozen Creel clerks, I think maybe eight positions right now. And a Creel clerk job is, if it's for you, if you like interviewing anglers and you don't mind working random shifts, I encourage you to, if you know somebody who's a student who graduated from Fisheries and Wildlife, or a retiree that wants intermittent job, these are great jobs. So I would encourage anyone who wants these to apply. And if there's questions, I'll share my email at the end of this presentation. So these are the Creel clerks, and we have jobs open right now. I wanted to share with you that primarily right now, the Creel clerks are in the Great Lakes. So this is a map of Michigan, and the red dots represent the coastline areas, the port towns that we're sampling. So you can see in Lake Superior, we're sampling all the way from Black River to Grand Marais. In Lake Michigan, we're as far north as Fairport, Manistee, and Bays to Knock, and all the way south to South Haven and St. Joe. In Lake Huron, we're the St. Mary's River and the Lachino Islands all the way down to Port Sanilac, and we also have clerks in Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair. We have these clerks here every year, and they're sampling the fisheries every year, and so we're able to provide trends for the Great Lakes. But as you can also see, the middle of the state and the tributaries leading to the Great Lakes do not have red dots. And so the other thing that I wanted to have as a take-home point is that we don't really have a comprehensive inland or tributary sampling program. And that's why the Michigan River Steelhead Volunteer Project is so critical that Dan's been setting up, because it's likely the only source of data we'll have on angler data that we'll have on tributaries in any given year. And you're sampling quite a bit of tributaries across the state. So the Creel estimates, we do have, the most recent survey we did was the Big Manistee River in 2016. Prior to that, we were able to get to the Boardman and the Grand River. The year before that, the Platte River. In around 2010, we got to the Betsy and Pere Marquette once, the Au Sable in 2009. And then the late 90s to the early 2000s, we had several years of data for the Grand River, Muskegon River, and St. Joe River. I will be showing both the Great Lakes and the river data in this talk coming up. So before I actually show the data, I just want to give you an idea of how we actually get to the numbers that I'm going to show you. So like I said, the Creel clerks rove around the state, and they interview people who are coming back from fishing trips. They ask you how long you fished and what you caught and what you threw back. Were you targeting anything? Since they can't be at every boat launch all the time, and people are fishing nights and they're fishing mornings and they're fishing weekends and they're fishing weekdays, the clerks sample a little bit of all of that, and they basically end up getting a proportion of the anglers that they talk to. So in this slide, the ones that are closer to Sam, the Creel clerk, are getting interviewed, and these are the anglers that didn't get interviewed. But what I wanted to show with the cartoon is the assumption is that the people we interview are a representative sample of the people we don't. And we take the data collected from the samples we get and we extrapolate it or expand it out to represent a whole area or region or time or fishery. So an example would be we sample some anglers in St. Joe, but at the end of the year, we extrapolate what the total amount of the fishery would be out of St. Joe. Or we sample all those ports across Lake Michigan, and then we can say something about the entire Lake Michigan. So what numbers and statistics are we actually producing? An important statistic that we produce is effort. So effort is the amount of hours anglers spend fishing, let's say South Haven or the Big Manistee River or Lake Michigan or Lake Huron or the Great Lakes as a whole. And we collect that information when we interview you about when you started fishing and when you came back to the dock. Catch is the number of fish. So we estimate total catch for different regions and time periods and places. And catch represents not only the fish that you harvested and took home with you in your coolers, but also the released fish that you put back. So that's the total amount of fish churn. And then catch divided by effort gives us catch rates. And that gives us like fish per hour. And that's a really good way of looking at trends across time where harvest or effort could change, but catch rates sort of represent a more solid benchmark for understanding what's happening at the actual population level of the fish. And like I said, we also measure harvest. So we'll just estimate how many fish were taken home in coolers, and we'll estimate how many released fish were thrown back. And then clerks also track the biological characteristics of the fish by taking clips, checking for clips, taking scale samples so we can age the fish, length and weight, and we can look at the condition of fish through time too. So are fish getting thinner? Are fish getting, are we seeing more clip fish? Are we seeing not? And so places where we have robust creel, we also have that information. I also wanted to put in here that if you do talk to a creel clerk, I encourage you to express your feelings about the fishery or ask questions. Our clerks are highly trained. They're happy to talk to you. And all of your concerns and issues do end up getting relayed back through our program. And all the way up to our fish chief, he reads everything that the clerks have collected through their time being clerks is written down, and he reads everything that they write. So you are heard. And this program is almost 40 years old. So we have quite a lot of data. So that's what I'm going to switch to now, is showing you some of the data. So this is the first graph I'm going to show. On this y-axis here, this vertical axis is number of fish. And on this horizontal axis is time. So this is the very beginning of the creel program, and this is COVID. And I have two trend lines. I have a yellow one for Lake Michigan and a white one for Lake Huron. And I'm going to show the harvest numbers of fish. So numbers of steelhead that were harvested in the lake, in Lake Michigan up here and Lake Huron down here. And I did want to note that generally the creel program runs April through October. And so I know that the steelhead fishery also takes place during the winter. And so this isn't representative of all the fish that were harvested. And the reason the creel program doesn't run in the winter is simply budgetary. So this is the best information that we have for the Great Lakes. I wanted to point out that Lake Huron's harvest is fairly low, under 20,000 fish through time. It was higher before the early to mid 2000s, and then it kind of died down until around 2012. And then it kind of peaked a little bit, and then it went down, and then it went up, and then it's kind of been going up a little bit in the last couple of years, but really it's a very small fishery in the Great Lakes. And of course, this doesn't include tributaries. So this is just, this would be the boats that are going out and whether or not they catch steelhead. And then also if there are any people fishing piers and catching steelhead, or anyone right on the shoreline of the Great Lakes catching steelhead. For Lake Michigan, you can see that we had a high of 100, well, not a high, but in the early years, we were, 40,000 to 100,000 fish, and we dipped down in the 90s. And we went pretty high in 2000, and then we went on a long decline until 2008, when we went up and down until around 2016. And then we have seen a decrease in harvest in the fishery, in the steelhead fishery, and maybe a little slight uptick in COVID during 2020. But harvest doesn't tell you if there's something actually happening in the lake, because we also want to look at effort. So is effort decreasing too? That could also explain why there's less harvest. But before I show you effort, I do sometimes get the question, what about the charter fishery? So this particular graph does not show the charter fishery, but I did go pull some of the data I had on hand for the charter fishery. So this is the same graph, numbers of fish and harvested by the charter fishery for lakes Michigan and Huron. And the charter program started in 1990, so that's when these data start. And Lake Michigan, again, I just wanted to show you, generally the charter fishery is harvesting another 10 to 15% of the fish you saw in the first graph. And it's following a similar trend line for Lake Michigan that the recreational fishery followed. And then for Lake Huron, there is almost no charter fishery for steelhead. I did want to note, if you're a charter captain and you're watching this, that it is mandatory that you report your charter harvest, and that these data are not samples like the recreational fishery is sampled using the CREO program. These are mandated reports that charter captains send every month. And our expert in that program is named Donna Wiesender, and she, I think, is in this presentation. So if there are questions about the charter program, I think she'll be able to answer them. But you'll definitely, if you're a charter captain not reporting, want to check out the DNR Fisheries webpage on charter reporting. So I wanted to get to harvest. So we had, I wanted to get to effort. So we had harvest decreasing. Let's look at effort. And again, we're seeing that this is now millions of hours anglers spend fishing. This is time from the beginning of the CREO program until now. And these are lakes, Michigan and Huron. And we're seeing an overall decrease in the amount of hours spent fishing. So does that explain the decrease in harvest? Maybe or maybe not. Let's look at the catch rates. So here's the catch rates of steelhead. And I just want you to note, I switched from harvest to catch to account for whether or not there was a change in catch and release behavior. So now this is the total amount of fish an angler interacted with, whether or not they released it or kept it. These are still Great Lakes, Michigan and Huron. This is still time. We didn't start collecting catch data until 1997. So that's why your axis starts here. And this is fish caught per hour. So, fish caught per 1,000 hours. So as you can see, Lakes Huron and Lake Michigan had very variable catch rates. They both kind of started to get bigger in 2009. It looks like they almost started to trend together sometime in this time period. But we've seen in both lakes a decrease in catch rates through time. And so that's a really interesting trend. And that's something maybe other panelists will talk about the reason behind in later talks. I did hear that for 2020, steelhead was better. For COVID, we didn't have the CREO clerks out until mid-season. And so we don't have a lot of the data to support that, but anecdotally, we heard the steelhead fishery was slightly better in 2020 than the previous years. This is another graph, and the point of this graph is I wanted to add the rivers now. These dots now represent the one point in time that we sampled a river, and I've charted them alongside of the Great Lakes. And the point of the graph is to give you, I think, the magnitude of the catch that we see in these rivers, particularly the Au Sable and the Big Manistee River. So in 2009, our harvest of steelhead from Lake Huron is around 5,000 fish. Our harvest of steelhead in all of Lake Michigan is around 30,000 fish. And our harvest in the Osable River is another, well, it's actually catch, I'm sorry. Our catch in the Osable River is another 30,000 fish. So in this particular year, the Osable River is has as many fish caught as all of Lake Michigan, and several times the magnitude of Lake Huron. In the year we measured the Betsy, it was pretty low. In the year we measured the Pere Marquette River, it was as much as Lake Huron. In the years we measured the Boardman and Grand River, they were as much as Lake Huron almost. And in the year we measured the Big Manistee River, it was even more than all of Lake Michigan combined. And so these tributaries contribute quite a lot of effort and catch to the overall steelhead fishery of the state. And their contribution to this fishery is critical. And again, that's why the volunteer program is so important. Ideally, we'd like to be able to see the Big Manistee River through time, or the Osable River through time. I think I did want to tell you that something that I thought was very interesting between the Big Manistee River and the Osable River was that in 2009, when we sampled the Osable River, we estimated around 30,000 fish were caught and released, and only 30 fish were harvested. In 2016, when we did the Big Manistee River, we estimated 20,000 fish were caught and released, and 10,000 fish were harvested. So there's different behaviors between these two rivers in terms of catch and release. So I often get asked about bag limits. And so I put together a couple of slides about steelhead bag limits. This represents Lake Michigan, the boat fishery, the shore fishery, the pier fishery. And imagine that you went fishing and you were a boat. You would come back and you would say you targeted salmonines. We don't have a lot of boats that come back and say they just targeted steelhead. So this is really, and the Lake Michigan fishery is more of a boat fishery than any other fishery. So keep that into consideration, and I'll break out some of the more steelhead specific parts of Lake Michigan in a later slide. But overall and generally, if you are mostly looking at the boat fishery and you're mostly looking at people who target any salmonines or trout, 93% of the people who are taking a trip are coming back with 0 steelhead. Only 4% are coming back with 1, 1.2% are coming back with 2 fish, and 0.4% are coming back with 3. And because this is catch, they can actually catch more fish. This isn't a harvest bag limit graph. So if we're talking about forever getting to the point where we're talking about truncating bag limits, we're really not affecting the boat fishery for salmonines that much. I was able to pull out just the pier and shore anglers who indicated that they were targeting steelhead specifically, and you can see the distribution changes quite a bit, and that quite a few people are catching at least 1 fish or more. And so if you were to truncate the bag limit, you'd have a greater effect here, but this is a much smaller population. This represents only 15% of the total effort of the Great Lakes are the pier and shore anglers. So you'd have less of an impact that way. I do get asked about charter. The charter captains do better than the recreational boat fishery, but not by a lot. But in this case, almost or 9% of them are getting at least a fish, and 1.3% are getting 2 fish. Barely any are getting 3 fish. And this charter example comes from just Lake Michigan. I did not look at Lake Huron. And lastly, I pulled out the Osable River just to give you a better feel for what bag limit distribution might look like in the rivers. So in this case, the majority of the anglers are catching at least 1 fish, and quite a few are catching more than 2. And so if you were to truncate bag limits, you might have a really big effect in the river systems. And so I know that question gets asked quite a bit. I believe that's the last of my data slides, and now I'm at my summary. So I just wanted to remind you the CREOL program exists. We do have jobs open, and our major estimates are hours spent fishing and catch and harvest of all fish species, not just the steelhead. But that due to budgetary reasons, we are just not measuring the rivers each year. And that's why the volunteer project is such an important component for collecting additional data on the angler catch of steelhead in rivers. Harvest effort and catch rates have declined in both Great Lakes, Michigan and Huron over the past 5 years. Note that tributary catch of steelhead can be equal to or even greater in magnitude than entire Great Lakes. And Steelhead River anglers look to be getting a steelhead at least 60% of the time, and more than one fish 50% of the time. And overall, Great Lakes anglers catch a steelhead much less, but shore and pier anglers do catch more than one fish at least 80% of the time. So with that, I will thank you again for listening to my presentation, and this is my contact information, and I will take any questions.
Thanks, Tracy. And you should be able to see the Q&A box. It looks like we have 9 questions that came in during the talk. Greg
asked, are these angler hours? For example, a charter with 6 earns 6 angler hours per hour. Yes, the angler hours are hours times the person. So if it's one person that fished one hour, that's 1. If it's 2 people that fished 1 hour, that's each, then it's 2 hours. Does the catch rate reflect the numbers of fish planted for that time? Do low stocking numbers equal low catch rate? That is something, that's a great question, and it's not something that I can answer, but possibly Jory or Jay could, so I would invite either of you to.
I will just quickly say that steelhead stocking numbers have been very consistent through this time series. We've always stocked about 540,000 yearlings in Lake Michigan. So the variation is due to something else.
That's great. Don also asked no Kalamazoo River. Why? Don, I know we did the Kalamazoo River earlier in the CREOL than I presented, so prior to the 90s, but I'm not sure why it hasn't been done recently. Jay, I don't know if you want to answer that one either.
It's on our list to do again. It's just budgetary.
Okay. Are guided river trips treated the same as charter on the Big Lakes? That is also a fantastic question because guided river trips are not creoled because they're not the recreational fishery, but they're also not mandatorily mandated to report. Although I have heard in the past that there is discussion around having guides report the same way charter captains do, but at this time they're kind of a loose string, if you will. An anonymous attendee asked if the tendency of river anglers to release steelhead skew the numbers any. And I would say they don't skew the CREOL data because the CREOL data takes into account catch and release and catch. So we're able to record whether or not they release the fish or whether or not they keep it. And we keep tabs on both of those things and create statistics on both of those behaviors. Raymond asked, why don't we require river guides to report catch rates? And I will definitely turn that question over to Jay.
So with the charter boats, it's part of statute. It's part of law that they have to report their catch. Right now, there's not a similar law or statute on the books for guides. Donna did respond that in navigable waters that guides do have to report. I think that was right. So.
Oh, thanks, Donna. I don't know if Donna can speak.
So yeah, so charter captains in the Great Lakes and those on connecting navigable waters are required to report by statute. And navigable waters defined by the Corps of Engineers, meaning, like, we'll take the St. Joe River, for example, anything Barron Springs and below, they're required to report. On the Muskegon River, it would be Newaygo and below. So once you get into the non-navigable sections, those are considered inland guides, and they are not required to report at this time. There's currently, discussions on that and proposed legislation, but if anybody is on those lower stretches of the rivers and the connected drowned water lakes, they are required to report at this time and have been for a long time.
And I don't know, Donna or Jay, can anyone address why they don't right now? The ones that don't. It
was when the reporting program first was initiated in 1990, it was more looking at the Great Lakes fishery at that time, and it was there wasn't a lot of emphasis put on the inland guides. There are well over 300 inland guides that aren't being monitored as far as their catch reports on a monthly basis. So I, for one, believe that it's very important information, and I would like to see it. To date, we haven't had that.
If I can chime in, if the guides were overwhelmingly in support of this, if people on the call are guides and would like to see that happen, I think it would go a long way toward getting the political support to do that, because a lot of legislators don't necessarily want to make more regulations and put burdens on you as guides. But if you realize the value of the information and you want to do that, I think it would speak strongly if guides kind of had a voice one way or another.
The next question is, there a chart indicating the river catch rates? There is, so actually I might share my screen again if that's possible. You can go to the fisheries homepage. And you can select research, because we're actually a research program. And then you can select Creel Clerks and Angler surveys. And your rivers are here under inland water estimate reports, and your Great Lakes data are here. So if you were to select any particular report, so I'm actually going to select the Osable River. This will give you the information on the river. It'll start out by just telling you what we did and where we sampled. And then there's the statistics here for, so like when I said there were 30,000 fish. Total catch, total released fish. So here's the rainbow trout. So our estimate is 30,353 released fish, and only 49 were harvested. And then the catch rates, you're asking, are the catch rates on a trout or on the chart are here. But we don't have trends through time because we don't have a second data point, if that makes sense. We just have the one data point. So that's why there's no catch through time. Another question is, Wisconsin chose not to fin clip or tag any Lake Michigan fish for 2020. In future Creel data, these will appear as native species incorrectly. Other than time, how can this be compensated?
Tracy, I can take this one if you want. This is
Jory. I don't have an answer, Jory, so
okay.
Feel free.
The fortunate thing about steelhead and Chinook salmon are very problematic when this happens, is that we can do something with the scale that's called a ratio 2:3. That is the growth before they smolted and after they smolted, that you create a ratio. And you can very accurately tell whether it's a stocked or a naturalized fish with this ratio. And so that's likely where we're going to have to go to distinguish those fish.
Thank you, Jory.
Great. Thank you, Tracy.